again. The topic today is Ezekiel 37, and we're going to look at a specific question. Has Ezekiel 37 been fulfilled? There are some people who struggle with this idea because it seems pretty evident that part of it has been fulfilled, but has all of it been fulfilled? So, as late as the 1850s, maybe even later than that, there were people in the prophecy domain who were interpreting Ezekiel 37 as though it was not to be literal. They simply couldn't accept the idea that Israel would somehow ever return to the land again, that the people would ever return to the promised land. And at that time, it seemed like an impossibility. All of the Jews of the world were spread all across the world, and what force or what thing would ever bring them back to the land? And so, because they couldn't believe that it was going to be possible, they couldn't see a way for that, and they decided to interpret Ezekiel 37 as though it was a symbolic description of something. And so they took it as symbolic or allegorical. And because of that, they misunderstood it for a very long period of time. But suddenly, as we know, right after World War II, suddenly it became a literal prophecy. They realized, oh man, here is Israel back in the land. Ezekiel 37 must be literal. And so things can change sometimes in prophecy that way when you don't believe what God is saying. But in our case here, in our time, we know that part of it has been fulfilled, and we can see that the Israelites are back in the land, and other things that the prophecy says are true as well, or at least partly true. And so we're going to look at that and ask about that question and ask, what about the rest of the prophecies in Ezekiel 37? Are they fulfilled? Are they coming? What's happening there? And we'll dig into Ezekiel 37 and figure out all that stuff. So it starts out, as everybody knows, Ezekiel 37, the dried up bones. And the intent of this dried up bones concept is that the hope of Israel, all of the people, is gone. And it's easy to understand why. A little bit of history here makes that pretty clear. After the Jews were forced out of Israel by the Romans, remember they had revolted against the Romans, and the Romans put an end to that and drove them out of Israel. And they went out into all places in the world, from Russia to America, ultimately. And wherever they went, they were treated badly everywhere. They were treated worse in some places, but they were always considered outcasts or rejects or people who didn't belong and weren't treated well. Um, and some of these things were especially bad. During the Roman Catholic Crusades, which was from like about 800 AD to 1200 AD, during those Crusades, if the Crusaders ever found a city that was populated with Jews, they would slaughter all of the Jews in it. So what happened as a result of that is, in Judaism, the sign of the cross, the Christian cross, is a sign of danger, and that's what it meant to them, because that's how they lived it. If they were a city full of Jews and they saw people with Christian crosses on their shields or on their garments, they would say, "Oh, time to get out of here." And so that's part of the way they lived their life that way. And so they weren't treated well by the Crusaders. And Spain also, this is in the 1400s, almost 1500s, Spain forced them out without allowing them to take any possessions or any valuables with them. And Spain did that partly because they're just plain old evil. They were stealing from the Jews. So the Jews had to leave everything behind, and that all became property of the church. And the Jews left without anything except the shirts on their backs. And then, as we all know, the story of World War II, Germany slaughtered millions of them. And that slaughter in that World War II event is really what is bringing Ezekiel 37 into focus here. That's what is that, and 38 and 39 kind of continue on from that idea as well. So after all of these things, the Jews have been so treated and now slaughtered by the millions in World War II. They doubted that they could ever be a people again or even exist. And most of the people in the world had the same belief. They couldn't see how it would ever be possible for that. But as a result of World War II, that we know that changed. But at that time, just after World War II and even leading into that, they had lost all hope. They expected that they would never be a people again, that God had thrown them by the wayside and they were done with. All hope was gone was the problem. But all hope shouldn't have been gone. In 1492, at the same time Spain is driving the Jews out without anything on their backs but a shirt, the three ships set sail to find a new land. And the new land that they find will become a strong supporter of Israel and will help Israel through the years that come and be its biggest and strongest supporter when there are very few supporters in the world right now for Israel. So it may have seemed like God had given up on them, but he hadn't given up on them. Even when they were being mistreated at their worst, God had a plan in action, and he was going to bring them a supporter who would keep them. So promises, Ezekiel makes a number of promises, and we're going to look at that now and also a little bit later on here. And what he says in Ezekiel 37:12 through 14 is, I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it. So a lot of important things, but the first thing that we can address here is what I've talked about before. Before World War II, no one could imagine that. And despite that this says, I will bring you back to the land of Israel, prophecy interpreters prior to World War II were not believing it was possible, and that this must somehow be a non-literal, a symbolic, something like that, description of something, and it couldn't be taken literally. And so, although it's obviously meant to be literal, they just couldn't accept that that was possible. So, but what he does say here is, I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Now, is that complete? Well, it's not complete. We'll see well, I've done another video on that, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and then it covers the battle of Ezekiel. And what we'll see there, or we did see there, was that it isn't complete. That transition to Israel isn't complete at the start of that, but it completes right after that. And so the idea that I will bring you back to the land is actually not complete. And a lot of people think that that part of 37 is complete, but it isn't. Right now, most Jews live in other countries. There are less Jews in Israel than there are in the rest of the world. And that will change. That happens with Ezekiel 38 and 39. So another thing that we see here is, you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. And that is definitely not complete. Israel right now is a very secular country. It is not what you would call a Jewish state run by God's laws. You wouldn't ever think of it that way. There are certainly people in it who live by God's laws, but generally it is a secular country and not really a Jewish country. And it also says, I will put my spirit in you. And that's not at all. That hasn't even started yet. But we know that there's going to be a time in the millennium period, and we'll talk about that some more here, where that's going to be true. And we see in chapters 38 and 39 that this promise comes up again, that I will put my spirit in you. But again, it's a promise at that time, and it's not fulfilled until after that. Okay, durations of prophecies. This is an important thing to understand about prophecies. Some prophecies are fulfilled very quickly, and some are fulfilled over a long period of time. For example, of a one that's fulfilled in a flash is when Jesus is sold by Judas for 30 pieces of silver. So that little negotiation there that went on between Judas and the priests was settled in just a moment of time, and that prophecy was fulfilled just like that. And so sometimes prophecies are like that. They're just a single point in time where something happens. But other prophecies cover very long periods of time. And we see some of that in Ezekiel as well. I've talked about the Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 battle. That battle is a very short period of thing. So a battle like that might take a day or two, and it would be done. And so it's pretty short. But chapters 40 and 48 describe the millennial temple, and building that temple would be a much longer term project to do that. And so, but we understand some other things about this, not just that their durations are long, but they can also overlap. And so what we see with Ezekiel 38, 39, the battle that is talked about there, that comes before the millennial temple. So chapters 38 and 39 describe that battle, and the battle comes before chapters 30 or 40 and through 48, which is the millennial temple. So they're in order chronologically there. But chapter 37 begins after World War II, so well back before our current time, and certainly before Ezekiel's battle, because that hasn't happened yet. And it ends by referring to the millennial temple. So it is a prophecy that has a very long period to it, a very long duration of all of it, until all of it is completely fulfilled. And we've talked a bit about the different references in there that are like that. and we'll do some more about that. And so Ezekiel 37 is kind of like a table of contents for what's coming next in the following chapters, because it describes all those things that are described there, is return of Israel, millennial temple, those kind of things. And so it can be thought of that way. And Ezekiel 37, in fact, by looking at the text, you could say that this might actually be multiple prophecies in a single chapter. It may not just be a single prophecy. But I'm not going to go into that in any depth, but it's something to think about. So I want to finish up with other prophecies that are in Ezekiel 37, and some of them tell us some important things. The first one is, I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. Okay, I will make them one nation in the land. Obviously, the reference there is to when the two had divided into Israel and Judah, the 10 kingdoms that had gone to be part of Israel and the two kingdoms that were part of Judah. That division is never going to be again. It is gone, and the way Israel is rebuilding now is entirely outside of tribalness. And there's a reason for that. A lot of the people who live in Israel now do not know what tribe they are. They're certain that they are Jews because they've found some records and some histories and were able to track it back enough that the state of Israel said, yes, we believe you to be a Jew. But most of them don't know what tribe they came from. And so the people who are returning to Israel are really one people, one nation in one land. No longer are they tribal, and especially no longer are they divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. So, and that's what the second item here is. It says, there will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. So that's really saying the same thing, that they're going to be one nation in the land with one king. And that's the way it's going right now. As I said, they have one leader who is the leader of the entire, all of Israel. And the next point is, they will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images or with any of their offenses. That is certainly a future reference, because that's not the way things are right now. There are lots of people in Israel who do defile themselves with idols and all sorts of things, and have all sorts of other offenses that are common to a secular nation. And so we know that that's a future promise for sure. The fulfillment of that hasn't even started. The next point, the fourth point, I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. Well, we know that that hasn't happened because they're still backsliding and they still need cleansing. The fifth point, my servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. Now, this is a little bit symbolic. When it says my servant David, he's actually talking about the son of David, who was Jesus, will be the king over them. And I think most of us recognize that without having that explained. But thing that's interesting here is the last part of that. They will all have one shepherd. And so obviously when you see that, you must think, well, okay, they must have multiple shepherds now. Well, is that currently true of Israel? Yes, it is. Because the rabbinic system that they're under right now means that every person kind of chooses his own rabbi, or maybe a couple rabbis that he follows, and all of these rabbis have different ideas about different things, and these rabbis are their spiritual shepherds. And so they currently are under a system where there are multiple shepherds out there, and each person chooses his own shepherd or multiple shepherds that he follows. And so this is saying that in that time, when David, Jesus, will be king over them, they will also have only one shepherd, and that will be Jesus. Second last point, they will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. As I said, currently that's not the case right now. And then the last point, I will put my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be with them. And that's the reference to the millennial temple. That sanctuary, that dwelling place, is the millennial temple that is described beginning in chapter 40 of Ezekiel.